1,000 affirmations cannot compare to the power of quiet. Rather than tranquility, dominion brings it. Plus, it's only there when you refrain from responding. Because of your training, you are expected to react to every look, opinion, news item, subtle change in tone and motion. Being swift required being acute, as you were taught. Felt being able to respond quickly was a sign of being intelligent. But responding isn't smart. Acting enslaves humanity. A man still bound to the world's approval twitches involuntarily. This is a clumsy waltz performed by an individual who has never firmly planted their identity. Simply said, you become a part of everything when you respond to everything. Invisible dangers, online rumors, news stories, and other people's emotions can manipulate you like a puppet. Your leadership is lacking. Because you can't lead from a position of reaction, you're being led. An emotional whim cannot lead to the construction of an empire. According to Jung, the unconscious will direct your life until you make it conscious. But fate is not destiny. Fate is what happens when. Life happens when you're not paying attention. When you react to things instead of making them fit your needs, you need to break the pattern. Instead of reacting with reflexes, you need to be calm and collected. Calm before you act, like a lion waiting for the right moment to strike, or a general waiting for the storm to pass before drawing a map. Being calm and collected is not a sign of weakness, but of self-rule. And when you're unruly by, anyone else can start a lead once they stop chasing, answering every pull on their attention, and wasting energy on things that don't contribute to their growth. When they stop responding, their silence becomes unpredictable and unsettling. And in a world where reactions are expected instantly, the leader is the one who can command. The sacred moment between trigger and response is where everything changes. Game changes. At that moment, the boy becomes the sovereign, the reactive dice become the strategic, and you stop being a mirror and become the light. Here's the first truth. Leadership doesn't start with controlling others. It starts with controlling yourself. And self-control doesn't mean repression. It means command. It means becoming the architect of your own inner weather, standing tall in the middle of chaos and not flinching, because you're the storm center, not its victim. When you stop reacting, you stop being a pawn. You become the board. You stop chasing moments. You start shaping momentum. And suddenly the world begins to pivot around you. Not because you forced it, but because every great leader you've ever admired was composed, clear, and calculated in their restraint. And now it's your turn to develop that within yourself. Because you became unstoppable. And in being unstoppable, you became undeniable. And when you become undeniable, you don't have to speak to be heard, or move to be followed, or shout commands, because your presence is the command. This is the most authentic and raw form of leadership. A man so anchored in his own mind that the world's storms pass around him, not through him. He frames, doesn't react to pressure, and restructures it into progress. You don't need to fight back because you've already won within. And when you've won within, no one else's words can reach the battlefield you've already conquered. This is not arrogance. This is integration. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, "Who looks on the outside and finds nothing but chaos and disrespect." Upon awakening, one ceases to react to the dreams of others and starts to meticulously shape their own reality. Apologies for peace, defenses of standards, and explanations given to those who have never merited your depth are rendered unnecessary, because one now leads through movement, stillness, and choice. No longer is one triggered by noise, as one has trained their nervous system to obey their vision. Breath becomes intentional, and step becomes deliberate, directional. Leaders don't rehash decisions, they carry them. You are now a controlled, directed fire, not loud or wild, that burns relentlessly, not to destroy, but to purify, to clear the path, to reveal the truth, and to make space for what must emerge from the ashes of your former reactivity. You're not here to be triggered, but to be the trigger, to be the beginning of something different in every room you enter. From that vantage point, you are no longer controlled by the world. Instead, you lead it with presence, not ego, and presence is unflinching. It frames everything through the lens of purpose and mission, as if you were a man whose emotions were no longer a tug of war. Only then can you enter, and that can only happen when your internal world transforms from a battlefield into a fortress, but confronts them head-on, because now you know the price of a hasty response, the drain it can cause, the taste of regret, the weight of speaking too soon, chasing shadows, and bleeding pow into temporary relief. You've replaced this with clarity, the still blade, and you've become the kind of man who doesn't care if he's understood, as long as he's accurate. You can see this in your relationships, where you speak less but say more, and you part ways not out of pride but exercising precision. You avoid escalating arguments and instead resolve them internally. This is not due to a lack of strength, but rather because squandering energy is costly. Having defeated your own chaos, you have become immune to manipulation, drama, and projection. Now, you're guided not by titles or volume, but by gravity, like planets that follow the sun not because it screams, but because it doesn't move. This is your new identity, the gift of the pause, that sacred second between trigger and outcome. You went from being in rooms to raise the bar, to make mediocrity uncomfortable, to make direction non-negotiable, to bring weight into spaces still floating in distraction. And the secret is, you do all of that without ever having to react. Your reaction became a doorway, a portal to your final form, and now you carry that frequency. People feel it. They can't always name it, but they feel the shift, the depth, the quiet. It commands, corrects, and leads without asking. Knowing that the room belongs to the man who reacts is one thing, but the man who pauses, observes, and then speaks with intention is something entirely different. And once you become that man, you'll never turn back because the cost of reaction is too high. The return on leadership, on the other hand, is infinite. This is because once you experience true leadership, not the kind that is given, but the kind that is earned in silence, you will never again give in to the small gods of reaction. You will feel the pull, the itch to defend, to respond, to clap back, but the return on leadership is infinite. Every room you enter, whether it's your family, your business, or any other place you go, you become the antidote to chaos. You become the one who doesn't merely hold space, you define it. And that space you hold, it becomes your influence, your power. You no longer settle for momentary satisfaction, but instead prioritize your dignity, focus, and stillness. You will not step down from your throne just to prove you're right. Invitation, not to be followed, but to be felt. For the man who stops reacting is rare and revered, not because he asked, but because the world bends around him. You've changed, not just a little, but fundamentally. You're no longer a man who lets his emotions dictate his logic. Now, your logic is based on your mission, and that mission is crystal clear: to build, to embody, and to lead, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. When emotions yell, you pause. When the world seems to be collapsing around you, you stand firm. When someone insults you, you respond by framing the situation. In the midst of chaos, you remain composed, not because you're unfeeling, but because you're centered. And a centered man is a compass for those who have lost theirs. You speak less, not because you have to, but because your actions speak louder than words. Your quiet cut through the noise, and your leadership starts where their noise stops. You become evidence, not of perfection, but of possession, self-possession, presence, and power. And from this vantage point, you don't have to convince anyone to follow. They sense it. They opt for it, because when you cease to react, you become more than just a leader. You become inevitable. And when you become inevitable, you stop chasing results. You attract certainty. You stop trying to be seen. Your presence makes you unmissable. You stop begging for alignment. Anything out of alignment repels itself. Then, leadership becomes destiny, not because you declared it, but because you endured for it. You pass the test that breaks most men, the test of reaction, and most men fail. Listen up. Most people get angry and give up their power in exchange for a comment section. But you've learned that the strongest man in the womb isn't the most vocal. He's the one who stays calm and controls everything without saying a word. This powerful man doesn't need anyone's approval, but he does command respect and loyalty from those around him. You've developed an emotional intelligence, an identity that can withstand criticism, and an internal system that can withstand the external world's ups and downs. And now you lead. Not in the future, not in theory, but in every instance when you respond to his principle, move precisely, hold the standard without broadcasting it. That's leadership. At that moment, you transform. At that moment, If you can learn to control your reactions, you will no longer need to ask the world to recognize your role. Instead, you'll be able to establish it, not through aggression, but through your actions. And people will follow you, not because you yelled, but because you stopped reacting and started leading. Your name will go from being just another profile to a pillar. This is because the world is desperately seeking that kind of leader, whether they realize it or not. The world starts to change around you, not because you push it, but because you refuse to flinch. This is the new you, not a trend, not a fad, but aligned with your frame. Your relationships change, too, because you no longer settle for partners who pull you off center. Your business changes because you no longer entertain distractions, and your legacy changes because you now move with long-term gravity, not short-term noise. Season, not a plan, but a framework erected from unwavering presence, reinforced by delayed reaction, nourished by discipline, and strengthened by truth. You have entered a new frequency. In this frequency, leaders do not seek outcomes, but rather create environments. Emotion does not dictate decision-making, but rather serves it. Each word, breath, and action carries significance. Your purpose is not to be swift, but to be definitive. Your purpose is not to prove, but to position. Your purpose is not to compete, but to command. And in this new frequency, you will find that truth. When they inquire, when did you transform into this? What made all the difference? Without providing any context, you will respond. Not with tales or words, but with a steady, unwavering presence. Everything started to follow your lead the second you stopped reacting, because there was nothing left to look back at. You never looked back after that day. Now you've made it past the threshold. A man who spiraled at the slightest provocation is no longer you, who moved to the beat. As a result of the mayhem caused by others, who had to spend hours, days, or even years handling fire emergencies. He was incompetent to put out and failed to start. Submerged under the burden of each decision you made to refrain from panicking, that man is no longer with us. The ability to watch rather than detonate, to construct rather than destroy. You have taken his position. This is not your social or outward self, but your true self. That one was shaped under duress, fine-tuned by insight, and set free only when the inner child stood aside to allow the monarch to ascend. Know you. Hey, take the lead right now. You rule. Being in your company eliminates the need for you to utter a word. Minutes before your physical body does, your energy enters a room. Now that you've strengthened your center, your quiet says more than the chatter of most others. Your neurological system has been trained. It's like you and your shadow have made up. Because it was earned, not learnt, that style of leadership is impossible to replicate. Allow them to inquire as to the changes you're making. Allow them to conjecture. Allow them to be perplexed by your sudden serenity. Incredibly focused in a world that thrives on diverting attention. I don't think you need to respond because the reality is straightforward. Instead of reacting, you began to lead regularly, silently, and irrevocably. From here on out, everyone does as well. The reason being that you became indisputable, not because you asked for it. And that, is how a guy rewrites his narrative. With unrelenting self-leadership rather than reactivity. You have succeeded to the throne. Just because you stopped being a waiter and started being it doesn't mean they gave it to you. And you don't sit on the throne for recognition once you become the ruler. To serve, you rise from it, not for the sake of self-promotion or accolades, but to maintain order in a society that values anarchy. For the sake of truth in a performance-obsessed society, so that a generation that is afraid to speak out might have a voice. Your leadership abilities are no longer being tested. The very definition of leadership is something you've come to revive. Being the most outspoken person here is not your purpose. You are here to make a lasting impression. Just because you remain motionless, not because you squawk. You remain resolute. Distraction is not an ally in negotiation. People whose standards were sold years ago do not need to hear your standards explained. In essence, you're the leader. You construct by remaining calm. You carry yourself with the dignity that comes with your name. Plus, you don't talk just to fill quiet. You speak when something needs to be said. Your presence grew so overwhelming that they were unable to escape your stillness. Your completed form is here. The guy who owns his tranquility, not some flawlessly manicured avatar. I mean, totally. In its presence, the world either rises to meet it or vanishes. You're no longer responding. Power is no longer escaping from you. You've stopped treating explanations like money, and now all you do is tell me not to fight you by your stance, your presence, and every inch of your constraint. You will not survive the conflict that I am. Therefore, guide with the grace, profundity, and utmost determination of a man who recovered his entire being by rewiring his spirit, retraining his instincts, and reclaiming his body out of his past self that was afraid of the outside world. You are the embodiment of the present moment, a role model, and the man who turned quiet into a weapon. And from this point on, you will never be a leader in the same way. Because reality, rather than reaction, now dictates your leadership style. I am yours, unwavering, unpurchased, and unstoppable. This is the final section. It was never justified, but your reaction to everything that happened after you rose to prominence was. Here the lad's instincts lie dormant, when faced with an overwhelming need to respond. Take a break. Where the previous self, the one who reacted angrily to every viewpoint, fought valiantly for every unclaimed territory, and jumped at the chance to change her mind, burns to dust. And from its ruins sprang a leader who is no longer compelled to do so, but rather leads because he is at peace with himself and his actions. You will now find that your breath speaks louder than their noise. Eye contact will calm the atmosphere. World will be molded by the choices you make. Your tranquility has the power to shift mountains. You have stopped responding. Dude, you're in charge. The entire planet, too. Keep on. It is doing it not because you instructed it to, but rather because it is stuck,